What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's Game Week 26 transfer tips. So I'm going to go through some of the popular transfers and discuss whether they are good moves or not. Now, I know a lot of us are waiting for the FA Cup results on Tuesday and Wednesday, as well as the quarter-final draw, because that's going to allow us to formulate chip strategies, which will dictate our transfers. But I still think we can talk about specific players. Any fixtures that are likely to move, I'll mention. And it's also worth saying there'll be a lot of people watching this video that don't have chips like free hit and wildcard, so they'll be viewing players slightly differently, so I'll try and cover all angles. And we'll start off with Ollie Watkins. Now, straight away, if you are someone without those chips, he's almost perfect because he's basically nailed on. When he's fit, you expect him to start every game. The fixture run in general is pretty good. In Game Week 28, where some teams will blank, Villa have got Bournemouth at home, just a good fixture. So double in 29, another good fixture in Game Week 30 of Nottingham Forest at home. And if you look a little bit longer term, if I just bring Watkins up here, in 31, it's Newcastle at home. Not necessarily an easy fixture by any means, but another home game. In Game Week 32, where there'll be more blanks based on the FA Cup, Brentford and Villa are both out, so that fixture will definitely be on. And in 33, it's Fulham at home, which is another decent fixture. Now, I know it seems crazy to think you can buy a player in Game Week 26 and they'll be good all the way till 33. But when you do have a lack of chips, some of your picks need to be with a bit more longer-term thinking. It's still perfectly fine to get a player in the short term for a double and then remove them. But if you keep trying to do that over and over, you'll probably end up taking a lot of hits. So with someone from Aston Villa, specifically in this case Watkins, no blanks in 28 or 32, double in 29, all-round good fixtures and nailed on. He's almost like a perfect pick in that kind of regard, especially when there's a lack of other forwards, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's a little bit different if you've got chips available. And like if you're going to free hit in Game Week 28, you may prefer someone like Toney, who we'll talk about later, because they've got a double in 27. If they don't play in 28, it doesn't matter because you're free hitting. And then they've got a double in 29 as well. And I do think Toney is a better FPL option than Watkins. But if you're worried about not having your chips, or you're worried about the yellow card situation, Watkins is probably the one to go for. He's just a good all-round FPL player, even if he's not that exciting. Like, I wouldn't expect a huge amount of double-digit hauls out of him. Like, his expected goals per 90 are only 0.35, expected assists only 0.11. It's nothing to shout home about, but he does often play 90 minutes. Like, if we look at his recent games, 90 against Everton, 77 against Arsenal, and 90s in the 3 previous games. There's only one game in the last 5 he hasn't made it to 90 minutes. So he looks like a really good option. There's not really much I've got against him. Like, if you look at the other forwards you could bring in, everyone's got Haaland. Harry Kane is more expensive. Toney we're going to talk about later. Mitrovic is in a place where most people are going to probably start to look to get rid of him if they've held on to him. Brennan Johnson's not a bad option because he also doubles in 29, is on penalties, and will play in Game Week 32. But I would say overall the fixture run is just not quite as good, and I do prefer someone like Watkins. Solanke's similar. Plays in 28, really cheap, double in 29. You could look at him as well, but I'd only go there if you needed the money for a different move. And players like Nketiah, I think more people are going to start to move off of him rather than start to look to bring him in. So yeah, I've got nothing bad to say against Watkins. Depending on your chip strategy, he could be a really good option to bring in right now. Not that exciting, but it does tend to tick over with points. 4.3 points per match, 7.3 million. It ain't that bad. Alright, so let's actually talk about Toney. And in some ways, he's similar to Ollie Watkins in terms of being nailed on when fit, usually plays 90 minutes, and he takes penalties as well. Slight differences being that he's a very good penalty taker, so you don't expect him to miss that often, and his underlying numbers are better. So 0.44 expected goals per 90, 0.15 expected assists. If everything was equal in terms of fixtures and yellow cards, you would just pay the extra 0.3 million for Toney over Watkins. But I'll come on to the yellow cards in a minute. In terms of the fixture in Game Week 28, they've got Leicester at home. That game is dependent on the FA Cup results. Leicester play Blackburn on Tuesday evening. If Leicester beat Blackburn, that game will be off in 28. If Blackburn beat Leicester, that game will be on. And there's no replays in the FA Cup 5th round, so the result will be determined on the day the game is played. Now, obviously, if they end up playing Leicester in 28, things look really good for Brentford players in general. Fulham at home, double game week. Leicester at home, double game week. That just looks like a really nice fixture run. If it's off, you've got 3 options. One, you just don't get Toney. 2, you do, but you go into Game Week 28 without 11 players, or you free hit. And obviously, each of you individually will be able to decide how you want to play it. But I think we can probably generally agree that, you know, Toney's just a good FPL option. The bigger things to consider are the charges that have been brought against him and the yellow card situation. Now, on the first point with the charges, because of the seriousness of it, there's not really many reports that are letting us know what's going on, when something might happen, when we're going to hear about, or anything like that. I've seen one tweet, people were discussing yesterday, I saw one tweet that kind of said something's going to happen imminently. I saw another article that said that there's so many charges brought against him, he has the right to answer each one individually, and because there's so many, this could drag on for a while. Now, what I will say is someone that's considering bringing him in this week, the charges aren't something I'm massively worried about, because like I said, it could just drag on till the end of the season. The only difference it would make is that I would try and wait until the last minute to bring Toney in, just in case we get any news. Obviously, it's always handy if you can wait until the last minute anyway, but in this case, I would definitely do it. The yellow card situation is a little bit different. So if we bring Ivan Toney up here, he's had 8 yellow cards already this season. Now, if you get to 10 yellow cards before your team has played 32 matches, then you get a 2-game suspension. And Brentford have only played 23 matches, so Toney has to get through the next 8 without picking up 2 yellow cards. Otherwise, he will serve that 2-game suspension. Now, currently, he himself has played in 21 matches, so he has picked up a yellow card every about 2.6 games. Now, if that continues, he'll probably pick up the next 2 yellows within the next 6 matches, which means he will serve that 2-game suspension. But of course, we don't know, 1, whether that will definitely happen. He may end up serving no suspensions, or 2, when will those yellow cards happen? And I guess then it depends on your risk appetite about whether or not you bring him in. I just think that he looks so good for Fulham at home in the double game week. I wouldn't want to avoid him just in case of yellows. Of course, he could get one for Fulham or against Fulham, and then also get one against Everton. That would mean that he would miss Southampton, the second game of 27, and then either Leicester at home if game week 28 is on, and if not, he would miss the first game of double game week 29 instead. So that would be an issue. But of course, the upside, or the kind of best case scenario, is that you bring him in, he gets through both doubles, and he only gets suspended afterwards. Either way, he probably is a transfer waiting to happen, but I think he's a good enough player at such a good price that it's worth taking that risk on. And if worst comes to the worst, where, you know, he does get suspended for Southampton away, he's still got a single game week fixture, and then you can look to move him on later. So that is the situation with the yellow cards. It's all about how many matches your team have played. So Toney doesn't have to have played 32 games, Brentford do, but that's still 8 games to go, so there is every chance he'll pick up 2 yellow cards. I guess it's a similar situation we've seen before, that I'm sure players are aware of this, but it doesn't mean that they won't pick up yellows. The only difference I think between this and Mitrovic earlier on in the season is in game week 27, Brighton also have a pretty good double, so you could captain a Brighton midfielder or a defender instead if you wanted to. I think when Mitrovic was 1 yellow away from a suspension that double game week, it was only Fulham and Chelsea that were doubling. A lot of people didn't have Chelsea players or didn't want to go for Mason Mount, and the only other real Fulham option was Andreas Pereira. So it kind of made a bit more sense to just take the risk on Mitrovic. With Toney, that might not be the case, but ultimately, charges, don't know what's going on. Might take until the end of the season. Who knows? I'm not particularly worried. Yellow card situation, I am slightly worried, but not enough to avoid him. Let me know below what you're thinking with him. So I know this video has been quite forward heavy, but obviously I go off the transfers that have already been made, and nearly 50,000 FPL managers have already taken Nketiah out of their teams, despite the fact that Arsenal haven't yet played their second game of double game week 25. Obviously there's some frustration there that he was benched against Leicester, and maybe some worry that will continue to happen. And interestingly, there was a Reddit post made before the lineups came out to say that Nketiah would be benched, which was correct, and that the reason was he'd been carrying a small knock, and so Arteta wanted to rest him. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know, because obviously from a goals and assists perspective, Nketiah hasn't been doing great recently, so maybe Arteta just wanted an excuse to bench him. But either way, if you're an owner, you can wait and see what happens in the Everton game before you make any decisions, unless you've already removed him. If he plays against Everton, if he starts against Everton and gets like next 75 to 80 minutes, I'd be more confident about him continuing to start, at least until Jesus is back. And with Bournemouth at home and Fulham away in the next 2 fixtures, there's every reason to want to keep hold of him. Obviously, once Jesus is back, then he becomes an issue. And I'm only really talking about people that already own Nketiah. I think for anyone that doesn't, there's no real reason to bring him in now. So that's what I'd be looking at. If he doesn't start against Everton, then he's a big worry and you could probably make a case to get rid of him. The only other way I'd think you get rid of him before Bournemouth, if you were desperate for another forward and Nketiah was your only route to that player, like Toney. But even in that case, if we think that Nketiah starts against Bournemouth, it is surely better to hold on to him, see what happens with Toney's yellow card situation, and then decide before the double instead. So I can't really see too many reasons to get rid of Nketiah this week. I guess just to play devil's advocate on that point, one, there's no more doubles coming up for Arsenal on the horizon, so they don't double in 29 like a lot of teams do, and they don't double in 27 either. So yes, they have good fixtures, but they're not as valuable to us as they were probably a few weeks ago when they had a double in 23 and another one in 25. Again, I'm not saying to sell Arsenal players, but I'm just saying if you were forced into it or you had the luxury of moving on, then maybe you could kind of justify it that way. And also, whether or not it was a knock, I don't know, that kept Nketiah out, but he has now played Trossard in that position, and Arsenal played pretty well. So as well as Jesus being an issue for Nketiah's minutes, Trossard may be a bit of an issue as well. Now, we might see Trossard play on the left a lot, and Nketiah could be fine, but it is just something to put slight doubts over his minutes. But for the most part, I would just be wanting to keep hold of him for Bournemouth, and if he starts against Everton, I'd have every confidence that that happens. But let me know what you're doing with all 3 of these players that I've mentioned. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.